Real quick, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, Greenlight.ai. We all know how important compliance is, and Greenlight.ai is the leader for compliance and EOR services, especially for talent platforms. You're going to hear about them later, but thank you to Greenlight.
Hey, everybody. Tony Buffin with Human Cloud here with Matt Matola, my co-founder. And we're super excited to be talking to Bob Pulver today, if I can even get it out of my mouth. Bob, welcome to the Human Cloud podcast.
I'm excited to be here, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Man, we have so much overlap, like we were just talking about in our careers. But to me, for us to get into the broader conversation, especially AIQ, I want to start out with just how you came up, because frankly, selfishly, it's parallels the kind of upbringing I had coming up through kind of a corporate HR experience. Tell me a little bit about that development and how it steered you to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. Boy, it's a long and winding road, as I think you had as well, Tony. Yeah, I spent 22 years at IBM, different offices and different domains up and down the East Coast. Started doing kind of a customer service job, but working with IBM's business partner community and some of what they used to call the value-added distributors. Basically, they would build industry-specific software, and they would IBM would ship them equipment, and they would pre-install it for their, the bank or the whoever was the end client. Started doing a little bit of auditing of some of that data and some of that work, and got into process re-engineering. So how can we streamline, different processes and workflows? That led to SAP projects, one of the longest SAP, fulfillment projects probably ever. And it might still be going on. Who knows? But that got me in and got me exposure to software development and different testing cycles. Testing these days seems quite different than it was back then, but user acceptance, testing and functionality testing. And then from there, really went into more like program management. So I spent a lot of time there. I did a chief of staff role, learning the ins and outs and shadowing, a high-profile executive across all of supply chain and supply chain transformation across different go-to-market channels. So I learned about, distribution channels. I learned about, designing better experiences for IBM's clients as well as their partners, and then started getting more into technology. So pivoted into, that was my first sort of crossroads, I guess, that I encountered. I could go and be yet another people manager in a top-heavy kind of organization, or through some of my extracurricular activity around innovation management, I could go and work at this, basically this innovation lab on IBM research campus here in Westchester County, New York. And so I took the latter. I'm always, I want to keep myself learning and engaged, and it just seemed like a pretty exciting place to be. So I spent like 7 years connecting C-suite clients to IBM research in some specific domains. At the time, we called it social business transformation, which was sort of the precursor to, or I guess coincided with digital transformation. And so that's where Watson was introduced. The mock Jeopardy studio was in my office, so I got to play Jeopardy against Watson as part of my job, which was like pretty outrageous. And then from some of the work that I was doing, aligned to what they used to call cognitive computing, like what we're now calling AI, or at least predictive AI, not necessarily generative AI. But I started going deeper into like the social analytics space. So I went into market intelligence, and there was a social insights, team looking at, again, brand reputation across IBM's lines of business. Set up a social media command center outside the CMO's office in Armonk. I don't know if you were there for that, Tony. And then pivoted into consulting, and then led this entrepreneurial program around how do we, bring AI more to market, and how do we come up with new ideas of how to use IBM Watson and some of its, then cognitive services or the APIs that were available, and how do we use that in practice in different clients and things like that. So a lot of very different hats that I wore, but I think it gave me a very uh, comprehensive exposure to different facets of the business, which I've always thought has given me a somewhat unique perspective. But it wasn't until I left NBC a couple years later, like post COVID, where I really got into the what I call the talent transformation space. Like, how do I take all of that, all those things I learned around collective intelligence, social analytics, identifying human potential, aggregating collective intelligence in different methods and methodologies, and then and really tried to bring all of that diverse non-HR experience to bear in this industry. So I kind of came in kind of Monday morning quarterback, some of what I saw, but I also recognized I had to be a sponge and learn as much as I could.
Well, in you had such a unique experience, at least when you look back, like you were doing it before it was popular. To me, like in hearing that background, looking through your background, really, especially in terms of how do you leverage this new technology to generate an entrepreneurial mindset within a large corporation? It kind of feels like counterculture or counter momentum, at least. How, what was that like? Again, before it was popular, because now that's exactly what everybody talks about. This should create that type of dynamic within these big companies. Easier said than done. What did you learn from that experience?
Well, I think one of the parallels that I see now is, we talk a lot about, from a CHRO perspective, kind of shifting how they think about their organization, moving from a sort of cost center to, a key part of the strategy, right? How do you actually build the talent strategy that's going to help you execute against whatever your business and technology strategies are? And so I think HR is still trying to make sure they sort of live up to that and can execute against that. But up to the last couple of years, it just seems like HR hasn't necessarily been given enough enough credit, or it's been somewhat underappreciated. Right? They're there to protect the organization, and then if they have to, help the employees and things like that. So it's like this dual hat that they had to kind of wear. It makes me think about back to like the early days of some of the innovation management stuff that we were doing that also wasn't getting any funding or attention. And it's like, I just thought that was pretty disrespectful because in some cases executives were asking for ideas.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't want to hear the ideas and you have no plans to implement them, do not ask.
Right.
It's worse that you're asking and then not doing anything. So that drove me crazy. Or as they tried to iterate and evolve the platforms and things that they were doing, because at the time we were moving to the cloud and whatever, and ideas that hadn't been acted upon were just assumed to have either not had value or had grown stale or whatever, and they were just basically completely overlooked. And I was like, you just basically threw out. I know that the good ideas might be needles in that haystack, but you just literally burned that haystack. So the needles are gone.
Yeah. They're gone. Right? They're gone with the flames of the rest of the hay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but one of the things I learned, Tony, in the tail end of my IBM career, like the program that I was leading was this entrepreneurial community was basically the result of this huge global enterprise level initiative called Cognitive Build, where the average IBM employee didn't know what cognitive computing was. They didn't know how this applied to their work. They didn't understand the proverbial what's in it for me kind of perspective. And so so you had to take them on this journey with you, right? Like, here's some education. They had basically an internal MOOC, right? An internal like Coursera or a learning platform like that, where you learned about AI, you learned about cloud, you learned about mobile, cyber, and once you did that, then you ask the question, now that you know what it can do, what can we do with it, or how would you use it, right? And so that's where you get the creativity and the curiosity to start to explore you submit ideas, you build a team who believes in that idea, you move it forward, you put it through a crowdfunding, build a pitch, you start to work on an MVP. If you've got some technical folks, you move it into and you pitch in a crowdfunding platform, and then you pitch through a Shark Tank activity, and then out the other side, you have all these great ideas. And so there was this huge network, not just at my sort of global program level, but within different geographies and different countries. You had this sort of critical mass growing, this sort of grassroots innovators, all saying, oh, you got to check this out. I've been working with clients in the pharmaceutical industry or whatever it is, and this would actually help solve one of these issues. And so so that's the kind of framework that I feel like everyone needs to go on these
Absolutely.
days, and from a generative AI standpoint. And of course, I've been spending a lot of time in the responsible AI and human centricity kind of space, right? And so um, I'm getting concerned, increasingly concerned, that not enough people are paying close enough attention to AI because they think it's too intimidating, or that they're just overwhelmed with, they don't know where to start, and things like that. And so we've got to get people on their own sort of personal journey so that they know what it can do, what it should do, right? Don't just deploy it anywhere. Use it where you should, not wherever you can. AI is not the answer to everything, but how do I know when to use it? How do I know if this is appropriate? How do I know what data to feed it? How do I build trust into the system and establish trust with my colleagues as well? Do I trust that they built this properly, right? So this isn't just about responsible use; it's about responsible design, because we are all builders now, right?
Well, especially when you bring up the design point, I think that can be in and of itself a bit intimidating for organizations, because they're still broaching what you started that comment with, which is people just being comfortable with AI, whether it's in their own personal use, which they're using it to replace Google, and they're just putting all their queries directly into a chat. I mean, it can be better, but it's not really leveraging it to automate activities or workflows or tasks. But then a whole other level is having the organizational trust and competence, which you also kind of referred to, in order to deploy organization-wide program. How do you help organizations bridge that gap?
Well, I think the first thing I talk to folks about is the fact that we have to acknowledge everyone's got a different comfort level.
Yeah.
Everyone's got some anxiety about some aspect of this, whether it's fear for their own job, or the the their kids who are going to expensive college and they're going to come out and not have a job and be back home, and or how does this affect someone who's approaching retirement? Like, there's all different, everyone's in a different spot in a different scenario. So I think one of the things you can do is, first of all, be transparent and clear about what the objectives are, and your place in this new roadmap and this new trajectory, as the organization and work itself might need to be redesigned, right, and reimagined. But I think if you can assess someone's, I was working with a partner for a while last year around assess their AI readiness, assess their literacy, their readiness, and their maturity at an individual people level. And then, of course, you can aggregate that, have your whole team take it, department, organization, whatever. But you start to look at patterns, and you can start to make some targeted recommendations, just like if you were in L&D and you're sending someone, trying to create personalized, sort of learning journeys. But how do I get people comfortable? Some of us are going to be jumping right into, a Replit, or Cloud Code, or some of these slightly more technical tools. Others are going to be like, oh, maybe I'll just try to, maybe I'll check out what this vibe coding is, and I'll just go into Base 44 or Lovable, and try to create something. If you're in an organization, that those kinds of things are great to experiment and get your comfort level up. They won't necessarily have the scalability to be deployed across an organization. But you're not in this by yourself. right? I mean, that's the other thing. We've been focusing a lot on individual readiness and comfort level. And Tony, your point is well taken around people just dipping their toes in the water with, replacing Google with ChatGPT or with Perplexity or whatever it is. And that's like not even, scratching the surface of what AI can do. But we all have that starting point, right? I
Yeah,
mean, the Google Home device in my kitchen is still mostly, a timer and a weather report,
sure.
right? Right. So, so I'm not saying that I'm like the most advanced. My AIQ still needs to be elevated quite a bit, but we're a couple years into this now, and I think we're past the point where this is like a novelty. We're really into everyone should at least be comfortable, um, knowing what some of these AI assistants are, but also know the limitations, right? Like changing your privacy settings, and don't upload anything work related, especially with personally identifiable information, into any of these public models and things like that. Where how do you overcome hallucinations hallucinations that still exist in these models? How do you overcome that, especially inside an organization? But ideally, whatever you do, I mean, for us as entrepreneurs, I mean, how do you make sure that you're being safe with all of your proprietary information and your clients' proprietary information and things like that? So there's some basic, part of AI literacy is that responsible design, responsible use. Can I trust the data that I'm feeding it, and how do I make sure that it's continually learning and advancing? Because sometimes it seems like I'm using some of these tools, and I'm talking in circles, and I'm getting frustrated, right? It just happened yesterday. I was trying to create an image, and it just was not listening to me and not seeing its own output to recognize that it wasn't actually getting better, it was actually getting worse. And so it can be frustrating for
Yeah.
people. And so um, but in general, at a high level, I mean, the technology is only going to get better, but you still have to know who and what to trust.
Can
Yeah.
can you
Go
just
ahead,
yell
Matt.
at your AI, Bob? Did you try that?
Say it again.
Did you just yell at it and threaten it? I asked in a
I
serious way because I have two serious questions, and I will say, I forget if it was Sergey or they came out and said they were like, as we know, if you threaten it, it actually works better. And I'm not gonna lie, I've been testing this. Sorry, Tony, but I've been swearing at it, and it does work better. And to your point, like it'll go in circles if you let it. It also is so lazy if you let it. And this is going to be a really bad analogy, but what I told Preston Tony is I was like, I feel like I'm managing an overseas plant right now because at one point there was like 5 different tabs open and I kept having to click yes allow. So for you listeners out there, like hopefully you can visualize what I'm saying. But like imagine there was technically 98 agents going out and doing stuff. There was 5 terminals and it was like ADD overload where it was like, okay, buttons there, okay, push, okay, buttons here, push. And then it was like, ooh, that agent's being lazy. Let me yell at it. And I literally felt like I was managing like a manufacturing plant on just massive ADD overload. And it was like it was a hallucinating experience. But my 2 questions for you, Bob. The first is like, how real is this? And the second is like, what is the impact that you see being on talent and employment? And I ask you the how real is this because I didn't tell both of you. Guess what our IBM connection is between all of us three?
You'll have to
uh,
enlighten us.
Actually, Tony,
Connection.
did they ever pay you?
Yeah, I was paid.
You were
Yeah.
paid? All right. So we've all been paid by IBM. I was paid from a friend who worked on the Watson team and had to make sure he was like spending a lot every week. So I was his fancy dinner plug. And it was so awesome. We would have like at least once a week the fanciest of dinners just so he could show that he was spending a lot. It was so awesome. So we've all been paid by Watson. And then I'll bias it a little bit. My belief on what does it do to talent, I do think, Bob, I think this totally guts like most traditional forms of employment in terms of like the traditional career path, the traditional university into company. I really think this like, and I wouldn't have said this 6 months ago, I really think it destroys most traditional paths but creates more opportunity for the alternative, which I would say is more of the flexible, the outcome based, you name it. But let me throw it over the fence, Bob. I mean, how real is it, and how terrified are you of what it's going to do to talent? Hey, everyone, real quick, I want to talk about the risk that is involved with an independent workforce. No matter where you are, whether it's the US, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the EU, whether it's London, there is risk in how you classify and how you work with individuals. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just paying someone. The classification, the actual collaboration, the contracts, the payments, everything is intertwined and must be connected in a way that doesn't get you in trouble with the tax authorities, regulatory authorities, and even potentially class action lawsuits. There are numerous examples of this. Just search classification lawsuit and you'll get plenty. Which is why today's sponsor, Greenlight.ai, is the modern EOR, modern compliance solution for the modern workforce. There's 4 things that we want to call out when hiring an independent worker that you need. And that is, you need to onboard, you need to classify, you need to send payments, and you need to manage this global workforce. It's more than just one person, and Greenlight has all of that covered. All right, I want you to head over to greenlight.ai and tell them Human Cloud sent you.
It's definitely very real. I would say, the conversation that I hosted earlier today was around, we were digging into the Eightfold case. There's obviously an issue around consent and what do we do with all this, data and things like that. So in terms of talent acquisition, I think we're hitting a pretty big bump in the road. But my sort of closing thought for that conversation was, this isn't just about one particular class action suit, which may or may not proceed. It's really about how we think about data ownership, and how we looking at things like trusted, verifiable digital credentials, and I know there's people in the human cloud community that know a lot more about this than I do. I just think if you want people to have control and you still want to do sort of outbound sourcing, and you're aggregating data, go aggregate the data that has been authenticated and is verifiable and is trusted, instead of trying to basically come up with signal from a bunch of noisy sources and drop conclusions from that. So that's not necessarily an AI statement, although AI I describe as a uh, certainly it's a factor, but some of it just comes down to um, the trusted data, and who is what data is it okay to aggregate, even if you have good intentions to say, look at all these contributions beyond the resume, for example, that I want to factor in. I want to go talk to, these are the kinds of people that I want in my organization, that I think would be successful in my organization. And so there's going to be a more cat and mouse, and um, more sort of nonsense in that regard, that I think we need to power through as an organization. But it's not just about legislation. Are you a trusted member of this ecosystem or not? And if you can't be trusted to gather true signal that's relevant to my skills and my potential for success, then what are you doing? Like, what are you doing with that information? So the people that are aggregating data, I would say, you got to be cautious about that. But in terms of AI, um, we talk about this human plus AI sort of partnership within organizations. I think this is going to get messier before it gets better, because people are still flailing around trying to figure out. I mean, I was on a call this morning where people were dissecting all these different frameworks around what the human AI partnership looks like, when to go full autonomy versus semi-autonomous versus all this stuff. And um, some of the experts on the call were just like, I don't even know if this is the right framework. None of these frameworks are really giving us enough information, and it's also for all these different scenarios, it kind of depends on the culture of the organization and how much that culture and that CFO and COO actually value long term the human intellect, the human creativity, the institutional knowledge, the situational awareness, and the relationships that humans have. Um, because if you're just the other thing is like AI is a broad term, right? So people call automation AI now, right? And so you can use types of AI to automate things, but you're going to get diminishing returns if you're just looking for efficiency gains and cost savings. You've got to say where can AI enhance and augment human judgment, human creativity, human capability, so that we can scale what you as an individual or you as a team are capable of. So how do you have the sort of co-intelligence with the collective intelligence of the team plus the um, artificial intelligence, I guess, is sitting in the room with you, who can be the contrarian, who can add some level of cognitive diversity to the decision-making body, those kinds of things. And so I think every organization is going to be different in terms of um, their speed and their investment level for AI. Don't think I think you ignore it at your own peril, because you've got to pay attention to what other people are doing. But I'm not suggesting that everyone should be an early adopter. I mean, we've seen all kinds of missteps so far. So being a somewhat uh, intently observing a lot of this behavior is important, but also letting other people sort of make the first missteps and learning from that. So almost taking like an Apple kind of approach to some of these emerging technologies as opposed to being the first one out there.
Yeah. Well, so the organization may start to implement AI or experiment with AI tools and find places depending on their culture and et cetera, in terms of where they should integrate it, leverage it. Uh, a question I have for you about that: you see this deployed across entire organizations working together through the design, implementation, the iteration of it. I'm curious because this is my hypothesis that HR tends to be the final frontier. Like every other function goes through it because there's a different level of risk or exposure. And then after every other function's kind of had their taste of it, HR finally can get on board. And I feel like we're seeing that first with recruiting. That's the front line for AI implementation into HR practices. And we're seeing, the pain and the mistakes that shine from that, but it's starting to get into things like coaching, like performance management. So in a year, do we see, class action events around those areas of HR as organizations are slowly trying to figure out where and how to embed it? Do you agree with that final frontier functionally within an organization? And it's okay if you don't, but two, do you think we're going to see that same climb in terms of after it's hit that implementation and more people are using it, we're going to see cases come out?
Well, I definitely think we're going to see more cases come out of it. But I think just to your point on whether HR is sort of the last to sort of take advantage of some of these capabilities. I mean, there's definitely higher risk, so you've got to be very selective with how you're doing it. You've got to be very careful. I think some of it comes down to how effective and strong the partnership is between the CHRO and the CIO, chief data officer, if you have a chief analytics officer, and are you working together to build some of the business cases? Because as I alluded to before, I still think the talent strategy is underappreciated, right? Or talent acquisition itself um, could be this growth engine. Like look at this intellectual capital we're bringing in addition to people who are going to be hopefully high quality and long term employees. I know everyone's still working on that. Tenures are still shrinking. Engagements still in
Still
the
dying off.
toilet. Yeah, but I think the more you can absorb trusted data you'll start to wake people up to, what's possible if we start making these critical investments in talent. I mean, your strategy is not executing itself, right? You need the people who understand the business, who understand how the different parts of the puzzle fit together. What we do in marketing is going to affect sales. It's going to affect customer service. It's going to affect all these other parts. And so, um, so I guess as part of my um, rationale of bouncing around in different parts of the organization is you got to actually learn how all these pieces fit together, and connect dots where appropriate. I do think there's a tremendous opportunity within HR more broadly, including talent acquisition. I know TA people don't always put themselves in HR, but if you report to the CHRO, I'm counting you as
They should.
HR. And so how do you even talent acquisition and talent management need to be working more closely together, right? You're all trying to evaluate talent. You're all trying to move forward the people who have the leadership capabilities and all the other attributes that you're looking for to make the organization successful, long term. And so, so I don't like the siloed sort of mentality there on top of reaching out to all the other lines of business and other leaders where you're all trying to assess talent as you're trying to get your day-to-day operational and strategic stuff done. So so I think there's a lot more that needs to be done, but I think ignoring opportunities for efficiency gains, whether it's everything from intelligent automation through actual agentic workflows and stuff like that. I think there's tremendous opportunity for not just sort of hourly folks doing administrative work, literally have administrator or something similar in their title. It's also taking, 10, 20%, 30% of other administrative stuff that we all have to do, whatever our role is. And how do you take some of that away and free up that time and availability to work on more high value activities? So sometimes people do need to not jump over some of those initial steps to start to simplify and automate some of their workflows before they just throw AI at it. And so I think that's fine, but you've got to recognize that however you're measuring success from an efficiency standpoint, the bigger gains are going to come when you make humans feel like they have superpowers, right? Like they have more capability than they ever did. They've got their own sort of they've got like team lead level expertise at their disposal, any hour of any day, just by the nature of the tools that any company can build to codify, that expertise. So there's just I'm a cautious optimist, I guess I'll say that, Tony. We still have a lot of work to do and a lot of sort of AIQs to elevate.
I love that. I love you bring it back to elevating the AIQ. I love that thinking, and I think it's great to be. Oh, did we just lose him? We lost him.
Damn, Tony, you really made him want to jump off.
I mean, he finished on a good statement. Like that easily could be a wrap up comment because he brought in elevate your AIQ, finished this dialogue. If that had to be where it ended, it wouldn't be terrible. But
This is why I'm not that worried about AI, to be honest. Like, it just requires more humans to help babysit people like us. Not too worried, Well, for you listeners, we're going to chop that up now. Bob will probably hop in any second. But yeah.
Yeah, but in the meantime, two trends I want to point out in just a conversation so far. One, I wonder if we went back and counted how many times trust came out. When you talk about AI and organizational implementation, trust is routinely referred to and pulled in. And as we talk about all the time, that's at the center of our business because we know the future of work within this flexible workforce dynamic ecosystem really is going to be successful where we can establish trust and confidence based on typically reputation across that system. And that's what we endeavor to do. That's what we want to bring to the table for enterprises and marketplaces and the providers alike, so that they feel like there's a single source of truth around trust and who they can work with, and we can speed up that process, because there's so much that just bogs down the process around how do we know, how do we believe this, especially when people feel like they're being sold a new technology that is scary in and of itself, particularly with the backdrop of class action lawsuits. The other trend that in 2 days we had 2 conversations, and we came back to HR as a cost center versus HR as a growth engine. And I'm very interested and optimistic to see how much we continue to hear that as a part of the conversation with other, whether it's a marketplace or a founder or an enterprise employer, because I do think that's a big shift that you hypothesized a while ago. And I think we're starting to see that come up more and more. So those are 2 things that really caught my attention. And I'm glad that Bob brought them back to the surface yet again.
Can I ask you a funny question related to trust?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
okay. Let's use this podcast episode as the perfect example, right? Let's say that we were totally beholden to a bunch of contractors, and we had a agreed upon contract that said that they will only touch editing when perfectly recorded. And let's say that Bob got really angry that his Wi-Fi cut out and is going to get so mad at us, and it's going to ruin a partnership. And let's say we're like, I don't know, like Apple and Google, and this might sink $1 trillion partnership. And I turn back and I'm like, why didn't you just have an employee do this, right? Like, why didn't you just have a full-time employee that I could yell at? Why didn't you just source up the way we've always done? Let me ask you that, Tony. As we get more automated, AI crazy, I would argue problems are just going to get worse in terms of more like the impact of problems is going to be felt so much harder, I think, with AI.
But I think that's true with any technology that speeds everything up. Whether you're working on a production line and you're finding ways to automate different steps and start running it faster, people start going, yeah, but what if we miss this? So like, what's going to happen to quality? Yeah, we got an efficiency over here, but is the quality going to go down? Or instead of passing memos around the office, we're sending emails. And so someone didn't sign off on something. And we can go back in time to a lot of technological advances where it opened up new issues, but that didn't mean the technology itself was broken. It was our adoption that had to catch up with its capability. I think that's what we were wrapping the conversation up with Bob about. It's going to have, there's going to be things that we're going to be like, would a human have made this problem? That's also because we've already forgotten about all the stuff that we don't rely on humans for, that happen every day without us even thinking about their involvement. So I think you get, some good and some bad, but you get mostly good. I'm cautiously optimistic like Bob. And I do think you'll always have a throat to choke, as the saying goes. Like, if that's what you're looking for, you'll find it. If you need to yell at me because I automated all that's never going to go away. And organizations are always going to be at least 2 people big. So someone's like you and I, we'll always have each other to yell at when something goes wrong. But for the most part, it's going to add value.
About that throat to choke, can you tell listeners that Human Cloud can be the throat to choke? And can you tell them how, like, now on the platform, they can just choke us rather than, I don't know, their own employees or somebody else?
Yeah, man, of course they can. Well, this is why we exist, because we want to make that selection process easier. And a lot of people don't know. And what they'll do instead is they'll say, hey, we need to find alternatives to our traditional staffing because we know it's broken. It's too slow. It's too costly. We know we have to do it, but do we have to do it all the time? No. So where do we go? And if they just go to Google, they're going to find themselves hunting and pecking and struggling for months, if not freaking years. Because even when they find solutions, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to decide which one to use. It's going to be really hard to implement. The reason we created this human cloud platform is we want to take all that noise and all that pain out of it and help you wherever you're starting on your journey. Maybe you kind of know what you're looking for. Maybe you have no idea and you're just curious and you want to go shopping. You can go there, get answers that meet you where you are, customize that, or at least they will be able to. We're working on these amazing features. So they'll be able to do all that in one place. and then they can show it to somebody. And if that person thinks this is all terrible and it's crap, they can come back and blame human cloud. But the fact of the matter is they're going to have a hard time saying they didn't get 4, 5, or even 10 steps further down the path because they started here versus starting, in the broad fields of SEO and broad search.
Can you elevator pitch human cloud to me, Tony, in less than 15 seconds? And you listeners, this is my favorite episode yet, to be honest. I now kind of hope all guests hop off after 30 minutes by accident, and then we can just keep riffing. But there's a listener that's asking, can you elevator pitch human cloud in 15 seconds?
Yeah, we're the marketplace for marketplaces. The future of work is flexible, but it's also very overwhelming and pretty new. We help organizations find what they're looking for, feel confident because we built trust into our program through transparency, validation, and certifications. And we've made that decision and that process a lot easier than it ever has been.
This is by far my favorite episode. All right, well, we just got 20 minutes to just have an ad for Human Cloud. And so you listeners out there, go to app.humancloud.com right now.
Good, yeah.
It's free to create a profile, so you can start saving your solutions, taking notes on them. It's free for 5 days for you solutions to go and edit your profile. If you want to see where you rank, see if you're number 5, see if you're number 500. I think most of you are going to be between, if you're listening to this show, you're probably going to be between 5 and 100. And then go and slice and dice. And so one wicked cool thing, Tony, that I'll mention is you can see where you will fit. So for example, if you are a large open marketplace, but you want to specialize in, say, marketing, you'll see where you fit. If you want to specialize in data analytics or something even like SAP, if you want to be like, hey, what if we just built an SAP service line? Our platform will tell you where you will rank today, and then you'll see where you have to get to tomorrow to be number 1. So all right, Tony, this is the best episode yet. I will see you on Slack.
You do say that about every episode. And I do want to thank again Bob Pulver, the founder of Elevate Your AIQ, who's helping organizations with this AI transformation. He talked about the assessment, understanding readiness, all the way through implementation. If you love hearing about solutions or providers that can help you along that journey, stay with Human Cloud. Keep listening. This is who we're talking to every day, every week, because we want to make that easier for you. So always a pleasure, Matt. Glad we could do another one together.
I love it. Listeners, we'll see you on the next one. Bye, everyone.